And welcome into another off-season edition of Spits and Suds. This time, a Game 7 Stanley Cup Final post-game edition of Spits and Suds. I'm Gavin Spittle of 105.3 The Fan. Just wanted to pop on tonight, and I know so many of you. I was talking to many of you on Twitter, and we were all watching. And as I tweeted out toward the end of the game, I have no dog in this fight. I wasn't rooting for either Edmonton or Florida, but for some reason, my heart was just coming out of my chest and I was so nervous for no reason. Like, I wasn't nervous for Florida and I wasn't nervous for Edmonton, but that game had me on the edge of my seat. So, congratulations to the Florida Panthers. It was a tight one down the stretch and it was a tight game. They are your 2024 Stanley Cup champions. But also, I wanted to point out, and I'm going to get sentimental with many of the players, people involved during this podcast. We'll answer some of your Stars questions as well. But there was another winner tonight. Don't take this lightly that the game of hockey won tonight, because the game of hockey had eyes on it that it hasn't had in years past. It's a Monday night, and locally here in Dallas-Fort Worth, you had Texas A&M. Unfortunately, they lose to Tennessee, so the Aggies fall short. You had the Rangers, who fell short in Milwaukee. But I'm talking about the NHL nationally competing. They were on center stage tonight. And if you just think of the passive hockey fan, the person that really doesn't know the game, because that ultimately is what's going to grow the game. And that's kind of why we started this podcast, to grow this great game in DFW, or at least to help it. And tonight, hockey got a big boost because both teams gave it their all. What did Florida do different tonight? We'll talk about him more. But what an absolute game for Kyle Okposo. 17 years in the league, only 4 years of playoff appearances, 1,050 regular season games, 41 playoff games, picked up at the trade deadline. And what does Paul Maurice do? He inserts him into a Game 7. What changed during the Stars season series against Edmonton? You can look at a lot of things, and I'm not saying this was a determining factor, but it certainly was a piece. And to me, the NHL is all about pieces. The same time Edmonton started to play better, Corey Perry was inserted. Kyle Okposo inserted into Game 7. Kyle Okposo was a difference maker with his experience tonight. I thought he exhibited early physicality. I thought his line was terrific. I thought they were out there on some big moments. But those are the kind of moves. The Okposo at the trade deadline, Corey Perry. Yeah, I get it. He's not winning these Stanley Cups. But at least he gets to Stanley Cups year after year. And guess what? Corey Perry has already said he's coming back next year. Just saying, not a bad piece for the locker room, not a bad piece to have on the ice in big moments. What a great game we saw tonight. I think there'll be people that will be fans of this sport now, beyond DFW, clearly. I'm crushed for Edmonton. And I know you could say, well, who cares? They took out Dallas. If you want to say that, I'm not going to argue with you. But when you look back at this Edmonton Oilers season and you look at how crushed Connor McDavid was after this game, it just shows how much he puts into this game. And I mean, the guy ran out of steam, and rightfully so, playing the last 3 out of 4 minutes in the third period, one of the top ice times. I mean, he was playing number one defense minutes in this game. As much as he could be on the ice, Connor McDavid was on the ice. But we quickly forget that Edmonton, at one point in this season, was the 31st team as far as the standings. They made a coaching change. Knobloch came in, and they fought and they crawled their way back to the Stanley Cup Final. I mean, even if you're still mad at Edmonton and glad Florida won, you got to stick tap that. That is like the Blues a few years ago who were caught fighting at practice, and then all of a sudden it clicked and they went on to win the Stanley Cup Final. Kudos to Edmonton. But this Florida team, and Matthew Tkachuk said it, as soon as they lost the Stanley Cup, they were in the locker room saying, we're going to be in it again next year, boys. And I think that experience put them over the top. You got to be there to learn how to win. And I think that playoff run last year took a lot of people by surprise. Florida did not surprise anybody this year. And they finished third overall as far as best record behind the Rangers and Dallas. And they were one of the most consistent teams in the NHL this year. So this wasn't a fluke. They deserve to win the Stanley Cup. Let's give credit to the NHL for this reason as well. Playoff MVP goes to Connor McDavid. Connor McDavid did not go out to accept the trophy. I don't blame him. No one should blame him. Let Florida have their due. No reason to come back on the ice. But what a run. Connor McDavid did in the playoffs what most people would like to do during the season. Like the playoff run by Connor McDavid gets you paid millions of dollars in the NHL for a regular season. That's how good he was. But kudos to the NHL. As much as you could have given it to Bobrovsky, and everyone says, okay, Bobrovsky, you know what? Great performance, winning goaltender. I like how the NHL stuck to its guns and said Connor McDavid was clearly the best player in these playoffs. And Bobrovsky was so good in these playoffs. And let's talk about Sergei Bobrovsky for a second. It was absolutely amazing that we forget that just a number of years ago, Sergei Bobrovsky signed from Columbus to Florida. And for years, it was talked about what an albatross of a contract Bobrovsky is. Just getting killed, the Florida Panthers were. And then it clicked last year, and it continued throughout this year. And nobody is talking about the Sergei Bobrovsky contract anymore. Similar to the Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin contract here in Dallas. Sure, we might think of it, but over the last couple of years, are those contracts that bad anymore? I don't think they are, because the players now have some players around him. It's no longer Ben, Seguin, and then the rest of the team. Now they're split up, both having good years. And you're like, you know what? Ben can go another year. It's the final year of his contract. And it's like, man, Seguin was hurt, but look at him now. Let's quickly go through this game and recap and go through the goals, 3 in total. I thought it was interesting. We look at names like Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Matthew Tkachuk, Alexander Barkov, and what do both coaches do? They throw out their third lines to start the game. So all the top scorers sit on the bench. And at times during the year, some people will say to me and others on Spits and Suds, well, that guy's just a fourth liner. Well, that guy's just a third liner. So your biggest moment to start the game, you start with your third line. Why? Because it's about energy. And if you told me a few years ago, guess what? It's going to be a game 7 in the NHL, and Matthias Janmark is going to be on the ice for the start of a game 7, I would say, I'll give you 20-1 odds on that. So at the beginning, adrenaline's running high. Warren Fogle with a tough high stick at the beginning. And it wasn't one of those high sticks where the stick comes up high after trying to flick, or you're trying to lift another stick and it clips you on the chin. I mean, this was a two-handed high stick to the throat/face. It's going to be called every single time it was in front of the net. And it really, to me, changed the opening momentum for Edmonton. Remember, Edmonton's great on the kill, and you can pick up some momentum by killing penalties. However, you do have to switch your lines up at times when you're on the penalty kill, because you're taking people from various lines that play on there, and therefore they have to take a shift after that. So, although it doesn't count as a power play goal, Florida had a ton of zone time in the Edmonton end. And after the power play, they kept it in the zone. And Evan Rodriguez, who was terrific in this series, did something I'd love to see more by NHL players. It was just a really smart play. He's cycling out toward the blue line, and rather than just dump it back in, he turns and fires it on the net. And I don't think he knew that Carter Verhaeghe was there, but why not? And Verhaeghe was in front of Skinner and lifted a tip past him. Barn was buzzing. Florida takes the early lead, 1-0. So one of the things that Edmonton's done all season, and especially in these playoffs, is the resilient. As soon as a team scores against them, they somehow come back right away and quiet things down. And it's former Stars forward Matthias Janmark, just a terrific stretch pass from Cody Ceci. Janmark gets behind Aaron Ekblad. I'm not sure what angle Ekblad was taking, but I think he kind of lost Janmark, looking to get in more offensively and keep it in the zone. Well, CC saw that. Janmark was streaking down the middle, lifted the puck. Terrific catch and drop on the stick by Janmark. And he goes Bobrovsky higher and in the net. Don't know how Ekblad wasn't with Janmark, especially up 1-0. One of the interesting stats they pointed out on the TV broadcast: 5 straight breakaway goals against Bobrovsky. Hard to believe that Florida won this series. Edmonton had 9 breakaways in this series, 5 of which turned out to be goals. I mean, that is more than a breakaway a game. I mean, the Florida defense kind of let Edmonton back in this series with some lapses at times. 9 breakaways in this series. So we head to the first intermission, tied at 1. One more goal in this game. Florida takes a 2-1 lead. It's Sam Reinhart on an odd man rush, and he beats Stuart Skinner. So it was talked about on the TV broadcast about the Edmonton defenders collapsing too much, too close together. But it was a really smart play by Carter Verhaeghe, actually. So rather than wait on the pass or hold back in the middle, he actually charges Skinner on the net. And what that forces the defenders to do is take you. And that collapsing of space allowed Reinhart more space to move closer. He beat Skinner. I think Skinner would like to have that back, but kudos to Skinner. He played awesome in this series. He was terrific all playoffs long. 2-1. Panthers lead. Florida 18-0 when leading after 2 periods. And they went on to win the game. Only 4 shots in the third period. Edmonton was all up in Florida. I mean, how did some of those front of the net scrums not go in the back of Bobrovsky? But it didn't. So as I mentioned, Kyle Okposo, 17 years in the league. And how much of a difference does Kyle Okposo make? The third person to touch the Stanley Cup was Kyle Okposo. That shows you how much of a difference he made on that team in the room. Sergei Bobrovsky in net, 14 years in the league. To me, this puts him in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, 13 years in the league. Just the years and being the dedicated Phoenix/Arizona Coyotes leader. Moves on to Florida, gets himself a Stanley Cup. Who I just mentioned, Aaron Ekblad, selected number 1 overall by the Panthers in the 2014 NHL draft. I really have always liked Ekblad's game, and he's had suffered from some tough injuries over the years. But because he was selected first overall, the expectations were off the charts. And even though he won the Calder for top rookie, a lot of people for many years thought it was a disappointing pick. But Aaron Ekblad has proven to be a very good defenseman for the Florida Panthers, been there for a long time. He picks up his first Stanley Cup. Paul Maurice, 30 years in the game, resigned from Winnipeg. He didn't feel as though the players were responding to him. He cared about the players that much. He wanted what's best for the team. Maybe he did want to go elsewhere, but he resigned from Winnipeg, goes to Florida. 2 straight years in the Stanley Cup Final, and finally picks up his first Stanley Cup after being in Carolina, Winnipeg, coaching over in Russia, just all over the place. One of the best coaches in hockey gets his first Stanley Cup in Paul Maurice. Matthew Tkachuk, the first Stanley Cup in the Tkachuk family. And I was kind of thinking of a comparison of that first kid in the family that graduates from college. And to see his father, Keith, out there and Brady on the ice, that's special. Absolutely love that Brady plays for the Ottawa Senators, but is right there to cheer on his division foe. But it's brotherly love. And I think this is absolutely going to fire Brady up for next year for the Ottawa Senators, or maybe a different team, but I'm thinking he stays with the Senators. Steve Stais has gone on record and said, we're going to build a team around Brady Tkachuk. But Matthew Tkachuk brings home a Stanley Cup for the Tkachuk family. And there are many players that deserve to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto. And Keith Tkachuk, unfortunately, has not got the call that he so richly deserves for an incredible career over the years. So kudos to the Tkachuk family. Many think of the first family as far as the success with Brady and Matthew and Father Keith, and it's a terrific story. So they get their first Stanley Cup. Tonight was game number 1,400 in the league this year. As I mentioned, hockey won, not just tonight, but this season. Record attendance in the NHL, record ratings in the NHL. College hockey booming. Hockey is on the rise. And I know it's still the fourth sport. I get it. It's still behind football, baseball, basketball. But you know what? Growth is growth. And the salary cap's going up and teams are healthy. And you swap out an Arizona Coyotes for a Utah hockey club now with an owner with big pockets and a nice stadium and rabid hockey fan base. Hockey is healthy and really excited. This has been a terrific year in the NHL. The fact that you could look at all 16 teams that made this playoff and maybe one or two, you say, well, I don't think they're going to go all the way. But absolutely a gauntlet to go through in the West and a gauntlet to go through in the East. And Florida picks up their first Stanley Cup. Kudos. Pretty awesome indeed. All right. Several of you had some questions and wanted to get them to them tonight. Brian Tatum asked, does the current hockey calendar put cup finalists at a disadvantage for next season since they're basically held out of trades that are happening during the finals? Also, does this late ending slow talks about including a play-in game to start playoffs? To answer your questions, are they at a disadvantage? Recovery takes time, but experience is there for Edmonton. I think they can build upon that next year. I think they're a tough out now. I think defensively they really, really improved. They're now just not an offensive club; they're a two-way club. And as far as the Florida Panthers, you give up any kind of recovery time, any kind of draft scouting, and you have players that are working on that. Sorry, players within your personnel department that are already working on that. So I don't think it hinders both these teams. I think in many ways it helps them. And if you're Florida, it doesn't matter at this point because the parade is happening in Sunrise. Marcia says, I don't think the Stars had the it factor this year like Florida did. I'm not going to disagree, Marcia. Listen, I think the Stars have the making to be in the Stanley Cup final and the making to be a Stanley Cup champion. I absolutely do. But what Florida did tonight with the physicality, I want Dallas to add to its depth with physicality because I think Dallas is one of those teams that can be really good at times, but they are based on speed and they are based on skill. I want to add a couple of other factors. I want them to be further better defensively so they have a shutdown mentality. And the other aspect, Jake Ottinger needs to have a better year. I think he can be in the top 5 in goalies. You guys know I'm a massive Jake Ottinger guy, but at the same time, he will fully admit that this was not his best year. But let's see what they do defensively. I think Tanev was a nice piece as far as that it factor. Let's see what else they can add. But I would like to see some physicality added to that fourth line. Third and fourth lines are so heavy factors when it comes to the NHL playoffs. Jeffrey at JLux007. I've heard you and Sean talk on this pod about momentum within a game, but not game to game. Do you think momentum is built across games if a team is on a winning streak? So did Edmonton have momentum heading into game 7? So I think both teams went into this game, and Connor McDavid said it best. We knew this game would be tight. I think absolutely just before that second goal by Florida, Edmonton could have made it 2-1. That's how close this game was. I didn't see massive momentum shifts in this game. I thought both teams had their streaks. I thought Florida came out early buzzing. I thought they exhibited their physicality, a lot of deep forechecking, a lot of checking. Thought the game was incredibly physical, and I think they wore down Edmonton toward the end. I thought Edmonton obviously was in a frenzy in that third period, a lot of quality shots on net. It's just the puck didn't bounce their way. But when you come to game 7, it's that close. And you know what? This whole series, Florida dominated the first 3, Edmonton dominated the next 3. People ask me all day, what are your thoughts? And I'm like, honestly, I don't know my thoughts because I thought Bobrovsky could steal a game. I thought McDavid could go off for 3 or 4 points. I thought Draisaitl could score a goal. I mean, anything could happen. And it was just a fun game to watch. Like I said, I was nervous and I didn't care who won. Let's see. Marcia says it hurts our Stars couldn't get there. I can completely understand that. But your team got to the conference finals for 2 straight years. There are a lot of NHL teams that wish they could say that. All right, the Harry Wagstaff, CC for Foxa, who says no? Well, I think Edmonton says no on that. And I think a lot of teams say no. So Sean said on the podcast something interesting that I want you to keep in mind. If the Stars could trade Radek Foxa, which would enable them to keep Ty Dellandrea, they would have. The reality is he's on the books for too much money. He has a modified no trade clause, which, you can find teams. But basically, to trade Radek Foxa, you're going to have to throw something in via a draft pick or a prospect or another player to have them absorb the salary. Radek Fox is a good NHL player who's had a solid NHL career. Has he played above where he was drafted, which was pretty high in the first round? No, but he's been a solid NHLer. You can't blame the player for the contract, but I will always also say the contract is prohibiting him from going to another team. So I think the Stars are going to be stuck with Radek Faksa. Big Rob asks, so here's a question, two-part. Do you think Dallas gets to 7 games with Florida? Do they win it or lose? I think Florida was destined to win the Stanley Cup. I do think that Dallas could have been a better matchup, but the question is, how much legs would Dallas have had left after facing 2 Stanley Cup champions and beating Connor McDavid? You never know. I mean, every team is hurting right now, but I just think Florida was the team to beat this year. And, they were pretty much the team to beat all year. I mean, the Rangers had a great regular season, but the Florida Panthers were the beast of the East as well. Also, the second part, what is this team missing in order to get over to the conference finals hump? It's a great question. I don't think there are many parts that are missing. First of all, first priority, re-sign Chris Tanev. If Chris Tanev goes elsewhere, which I think Dallas will make a push to keep him, and it was great to see, and I know that he has to say it, but Chris Tanev really enjoyed his time in Dallas. So that's first priority. Second priority, I would love to see them beef up that third line pairing. Ryan Suter, to me, is coming back. And I think Ryan Suter as a third line pairing is actually a good third line pairing. He had a really good regular season, had a very good 2 rounds of the playoffs, struggled against Edmonton. But overall, I thought it was a solid second season for Ryan Suter because he's not playing first line minutes anymore. Sean doesn't think Liam Bixel's going to start the season in Dallas. He thinks he's going to start in Texas. But Bixel will provide that physicality that I think the Stars need. I do think I would like to see them get tougher on the blue line and tougher from a forward standpoint. And you can say, Gavin, there you go with the physicality again. But look at the teams that win the Stanley Cup. Was Florida physical this year? When you watch that game tonight, was Florida physical? Absolutely they were, in front of the net and against the boards and deep on the forecheck. Was Las Vegas physical when they won the Stanley Cup? Absolutely. Colorado, who did they pick up when they won the Stanley Cup? Manson on the blue line and a couple of other parts. Remember, they had Kadri as well, a physical center. So Colorado became more physical to get over the hump. I think this team needs to get more physical, and I'm willing to give up some of that talent to get more physical. I know Steve Staios said the Ottawa GM mentioned we're building our team around Brady Tkachuk. But how good would a Tkachuk look in a Stars uniform? A young, physical forward that can put points up? That's what they need. I really do think they need someone in front of the net, and that's one of the downsides. And I know Ty Dellandrea wasn't going to get the playing time this year. And you know what? Ty Dellandrea has had many chances. But one thing that Ty Dellandrea did provide that I think the Stars had been lacking, how many times on this podcast did we talk about poor starts? You need energy guys. And losing Ty Dellandrea, who's going to be that energy guy that comes out next year? And if the game's not going their way, makes a difference with a big check, a deep forecheck, a hustle play, drawing a penalty, things like that. A lot of people saying it was a great hockey game tonight, and absolutely it was. Eden Shallow says she felt the same way I did. Hadn't been that anxious, excited for a game without a team I root for in ages. Yeah, I agree. K-Twiz at KT23 Sports. It's been a goalie carousel today, Gavin. Does Dallas think about upgrading their backup from Wedgwood? I think the offer will be made for Wedgwood to return. But Wedgwood, if he gets a better offer than Dallas, I could see him moving on. Backup goalies are very valuable. I think teams will look at that span of time in which Wedgwood was in for Ottinger and the team continued to win. And I think that's a valuable asset to have on your bench with a lot of experience. But I think Jim Nill will absolutely try to do that. If not, they'll have to pick someone up. A lot of people talking about Matthias Janmark's goal tonight. Fuzzy says, Gavin, where the hell was this Janmark when he was a star? I've told you guys this story when I used to sit in the stands and Matthias Janmark would go on a breakaway, which he had many for Dallas. Everyone would stand up and I'd say, he's not going to score. He's not going to score. But I don't discount the fact that Matthias Janmark is on a team like with players like Hyman, like Draisaitl, and like McDavid, and learn some moves, because the Matthias Janmark moves we saw the last couple of games, quite impressive. Let's give the former Stars forward some credit. Matthias Janmark is building himself quite a career. Granted, he does jump around, but teams are looking for that Matthias Janmark, a guy who's going to give it his all every single game, grind in the corners, be that pesky guy, and be an excellent penalty killer. I think players like Matthias Janmark can find teams to play on, and I think he'll have a home, team to play for, I don't know, another 5-6 years. Really, really impressive, the career he's built. Okay, Tolo E asked me earlier, are you going to root for a certain team tonight? Like I said, I had no team to root for tonight, and I absolutely enjoyed it. I think that was something that, to me, it was just fun kicking back and enjoying a game 7. Granted, would love for Dallas to be there. Chev Chelios asked earlier, I know Nils Lundqvist is an RFA, but could the Stars still trade him for a depth piece in return or not? And the answer is restricted free agents can be traded. So, like, for instance, if for some reason Jim Nill, which he won't, and nor should he, wanted to trade Thomas Harley because he was getting a really nice return, he can trade his rights. Then Thomas Harley would have to sign with the team he's traded to. Otherwise, Thomas Harley sits and he's still property of that club. And it's not one of those things where you can sit for 2 years. It's one of those, when you're a restricted free agent, you're the team's. It's not like a year goes by and you don't sign. You remain a restricted free agent. So that basically describes restricted free agency. There are a lot of quality restricted free agents out there, but there is a unwritten rule that is mostly followed. You had Sebastian Aho a couple of years ago that was offered a restricted free agent contract by the Montreal Canadiens, and it probably could have been lower than what Carolina was going to offer him. Carolina immediately re-signed Aho at that rate. So that's another thing to understand. If for some reason a team comes and offers Thomas Harley a contract, it's not like the Stars can counter offer with another deal. The Stars have to match that contract. So they'll give a qualifying offer, and that will retain their rights as a restricted free agent. And it'll be interesting to see if they make a qualifying offer for Nils Lundqvist or if they just let him go onto the free agent market. At that point, you do become a unrestricted free agent. So, big trade tonight, or later this afternoon. The Boston Bruins and Ottawa Senators made a trade. Linus Ullmark, the 50-50 goalie for the Boston Bruins. And why are they trading him? Because they need the cap space to re-sign Jeremy Swayman, who they feel is their number one goalie. So to make space, Ullmark goes to the Ottawa Senators, and the Ottawa Senators were in desperate need of a top-tier goaltender. They're a rebuilding team with some nice pieces, and at the same time, it's a good team to go to. He's going to get a lot of work. So Linus Allmark to the Ottawa Senators for Jonas Korpisalo, who will be the backup in Boston, Matt Kostelek, and a first-round pick in the 2024 NHL draft. So Boston gets something back for a player that they needed to get rid of and hated to get rid of. Is this was clearly a salary cap move by Boston. They liked Allmark. They loved the goaltending duo. Allmark blocked a trade earlier this year at the trade deadline to the LA Kings, it was reported, but he will be going to the Ottawa Senators, and Ottawa finally gets what I feel is a top tier goaltender. So one of the interesting aspects why I bring this up was Jacob Chikrin was not part of that deal. A lot of people thought that he would be a part of this deal going back to Boston. So now it'll be interesting to see, does Jacob Chikrin, who has 1 year left on his deal, does he get traded by the upcoming NHL draft? And they said they're building around Brady Tkachuk, but let's see if that's actually the case or if Ottawa gets a haul back for Brady Tkachuk. So a lot of moves in the last couple of days. Could the Stars be interested in Jacob Chikrin? Well, that would be very interesting. Sean, myself, even Chev Chelios, big fans of Jacob Chikrin. He would be a very interesting piece. You want to talk about a quality two-way defenseman, a guy that's really good defensively and can really move the puck offensively. Jacob Chikrin's that guy. Just a terrific two-way defenseman with a lot of players left, a lot of years left in this league. So that's going to do it for Spits and Suds tonight. Just wanted to pop on, answer some of your questions. Sean Shapiro will join us later in this week to also get his thoughts on this Stanley Cup final. He was in the barn tonight in Florida, so we'll get Sean's reaction, and we'll also talk about the NHL draft. So thank you one and all for supporting Spits and Suds. We have had a heck of a June, and it's because of you. And don't forget, two things if you could, to help us keep producing these off-season podcasts. If you get a chance and you can write a review wherever your podcast is found, if it's on Apple or if it's on Spotify or whether you can leave a review. If you could leave a review for Spits and Suds, that helps us move to the top of the page as far as Stars podcasts on Google. So, and I always like to read the reviews, and thank you so much for doing that. It's a great way to improve upon the program. And if you could just click all 5 stars, we would appreciate it. The other thing, spread the word. We're trying to bring you as much Stars coverage, off-season coverage, NHL coverage as possible as we make our way to training camp. So when people are talking about the Stars with you, just say, hey, you know what? You need to check out Spits and Suds. They have some great people on, and we'll have a lot of guests coming on this off-season. So we're doing a lot of things. So if you could just spread the word. You guys are our teammates in this. Together, we have made this the top local Stars podcast, and that is absolutely awesome. It fires all of our contributors up to do more programs like we're doing tonight. So thank you one and all. We'll be back later this week on Spits and Suds. Have a great day, everyone. Stick down.